Much has been made about the point guards who withdrew from the NBA draft process, but there are still a lot of elite floor generals headed to the league.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined today by the great Leaf Thulin. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day of the week, whether we're in season or out of season. Shows coming to you 5 days a week. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. And remind you all that today's episode can be brought to you ad-free on Amazon Music. Also, folks, right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel when your first $5 bet wins. Well, Leaf and I are going to draft / rank / discuss the best point guards in the NBA draft process. There's been a lot of conversation by many media outlets, including us, about the players who pulled out of the draft. LeBaron Philon for Alabama, Boogie Fland, Tahad Pettiford, et cetera. But we want to talk about the guys who still are in the draft process. We're going to focus on college guys, so we're not going to talk about Nolan Traore in particular, who's one of the better draft point guards, but because he didn't play college ball and this is a college show, we're going to focus on the college guys. But what we're going to do is we're each going to draft 5 point guards who are in this draft class, based more or less on their NBA potential. We'll also talk about their college skill sets, what they did well, what they might translate well to the next level, maybe some limitations that they each might have going forward. And we're going to do 2 picks in the first segment, 4 in the second segment, final 4 in the last segment, maybe talk some honorable mentions as well. But Leaf, before we actually get started with this draft, and I think we probably know where we're going at the top of the draft, but I kind of just want your thoughts on this point guard class specifically. I think it's a class that's gotten a lot of attention, but like we said, with Pettiford and Philon and Fland and Uzan and Owe and a couple others pulling out of the draft, it's gotten a little bit thinner in terms of the overall kind of success of this class and how many guys might make an impact at the next level. What are your thoughts on this group of point guards going into the league next year?
Well, yeah, it's very top heavy in the sense of you have 3 guys, and one of them that I consider a point guard we'll talk about shortly.
Mm-hmm.
You got 3 of them that I think are top 7 picks.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's more than any class we've had recently.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got a fair amount that were very successful in college that we don't know exactly where they're going to go in the draft, namely Walter Clayton Jr. He's a guy whose buzz is through the roof because he had a tremendous March Madness. Those type of guys tend to rise, but how far can a guy who's as old as he is rise? And so there's going to be some guys that you think are deserving of better from their college careers that probably don't get picked as highly because their traits don't match up what the NBA wants. But at the top, you got guys that'll go in the top 7. And typically point guards are not quite picked that highly, especially not at that volume. So I would say it's a good college class of point guards. And especially when you add into the equation the international guards, it becomes a very guard heavy class.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is a really good top-heavy class. There's a handful of guys that I think will go in the lottery. I'm very curious. I have 2 names that I think are going to go in the top 7. So there's probably somebody that I don't have considered a point guard, but I am interested to hear. However, I do think I know where you're going first, and I am going to let you pick first. So why don't you fire it off and let us know who you think is the best college point guard in this draft class. Take it away.
It's Dylan Harper. No surprise there. Dylan Harper is a very well-taught son of a pro, and you can tell he's polished. He gets where he wants on the floor. He's never going too quickly, gets where he wants with ease, scores at the rack, is able to distribute. His team was not particularly good, and he still got wherever he wanted without shooting to support him. He also, many people think about, oh, can he shoot? Well, when he lines his feet up, he's a catch-and-shoot guy. He's in the 90th percentile. So there's questions about how well he shoots off the dribble. That's fair. But when he lines his feet up and shoots it, he's a very good shooter. He gets where he wants. His game reminds me of Cade Cunningham. I don't think he's quite as smooth as Cade Cunningham was at Oklahoma State, and I don't think he's quite as big as Cade Cunningham. But I think he's an even more dynamic driver, whereas Cade Cunningham was more reliant on his size and heft. I think Harper is a little more switch of gears, gets to the rim when he wants to. So this is the guy that's going to go number 2 in the draft. Like, maybe there's some people saying, oh, you know what, it could be Ace. I think it's more likely Ace falls to 5 than it is he goes 2 right now. I think it's Flag, then Harper, and that's what it is. So Harper's the easy pick right here.
Yeah, 100%. I'm Harper's positional size, his well-rounded skill set, his age. I mean, he has legitimate star potential in a class that I think there's a handful of guys who have star potential, but many of them have a lot more obvious warts or a lower floor. And I think Flag and Harper are kind of the two guys that have star potential, but also seemingly have a high floor just because of the variety of different things that they can do. I really like Dylan Harper. I think I'll be very interested to see if San Antonio just keeps the pick and takes him, and what they then do with Fox and Harper and Stephon Castle, a very crowded backcourt. But man, an embarrassment of riches for them alongside Wemby if they do end up keeping that pick. So I'm going to go with the guy that is probably the third of your top 7 point guards. So I'm curious who you go with after this, but I'm going to go with one of the youngest players in the entire draft class, Jeremiah Fears, a guy that it took me a while to come around on him, and I'm still not 100% there. The size is a little bit concerning to me, and some of the efficiency stuff, and the outside shooting in particular, but man, the overall scoring ability compared with his size. I mean, the fact that a shout out to Porter Moser for just kind of letting him go at Oklahoma too, because he's so good and he's so talented. And in particular, he's really good at drawing contact, getting to the line, converting from the stripe. He's a lead guard who has the ability to impact a lot of different teams. I know a team you follow very closely, Leaf in Utah, has been kind of connected to him at, I think, 5 overall. There's a handful of other teams that could really look at him. Brooklyn could look at him. New Orleans could look at him at 7. I'm really interested where Fears ends up going. I do think that the floor is a little lower for him, but the upside is really high, especially with how productive he was in a tough conference as one of the youngest players in the sport.
So this is a funny coincidence. You said 2 things that I have said in various podcasts the last couple of days. So I've been filling in as host of the Locked On Wizards recently, and the Wizards have the 6th pick, and we discussed a rumor where Jeremiah Fears is more likely to be gone in the top 7, and it's more likely to be 2 through 5 than 6 or 7 with the Wizards at 6. That obviously matters. And the point I made was exactly that. I said, if you're asking me how likely it is for him to be an all-star, I think he's got a top 5 case to be an all-star, but I don't see his floor being as high as many taken in the top 10 because he's the type of guy you let him run. The second coincidence is I'm doing a broadcasting camp, and the game that I was assigned was Oklahoma versus UConn. So I watched that game last night, and I was watching Jeremiah Fears, and I was like, man, this guy can go. But it's just Oklahoma and I watched plenty of Oklahoma, but you kind of forget it's just on an island figuring out how to play basketball and create against a team that is game planning to just guard Jeremiah Fears. And yet he started the game well and ends up with 20 points and is in a team win, or sorry, a loss in which they scored 59 points total. And he scored 20 and he gets the rack at will and he creates others, and they didn't knock down any shots, and they're a 37% 3-point shooting team. So Jeremiah Fears, I really like. When he hit the game winner against Michigan, I remember this vividly. I called my friend and said, hey, is this Jeremiah Fears kid better than Trey Johnson? Is he better than VJ Edgecombe? And everyone was like, man, what are you talking about? And then it became a more commonplace thought. I don't know if I'm quite there over VJ, or sorry, over Trey, but I can break him over VJ and I'd be all right. So I like Jeremiah Fears. I do have a guy ranked ahead of him that I think many would think of as a shooting guard because in college he shot a lot. But if you watched him play, I'd argue he was their point guard.
Let's hear about it, Leaf. I'm really excited to hear who you got coming up next. Picks 3 through 6 of our point guard NBA draft are coming up next, including quite a few guys who are still very likely going to end up in the lottery of this draft class. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA Finals are getting underway tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday. Every night so far in these playoffs has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's those game-winning shots like Tyrese Halliburton had, a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And game 1 Thursday, like we said, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time in Oklahoma City. The Thunder are 9.5-point favorites right now at FanDuel. They're sitting at -420 on the money line to win that thing outright. And if you're new to FanDuel it is the perfect time to sign up. Not only can you throw some money down on what should be a really fun NBA Finals, but if you head to FanDuel now and place your first $5 bet and it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still joined by Leaf Thulin here, still drafting point guards in the NBA draft process, specifically college point guards. We talked to Dylan Harper and Jeremiah Fears so far. Leaf, you are up next. Who is the next point guard that you want to talk about in this draft class?
So this guy, I believe, is a point guard and will be defined as a shooting guard by many, but I think his role could be a point guard in the NBA and was a point guard in college basketball, but no one saw it as a point guard inexplicably. Well, so this is a guy I have above Jeremiah Fears.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Trey Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Johnson scored 20 a game, led the SEC in scoring as a freshman. Trey Johnson had the ball in his hands incessantly, was the primary creator for Texas. So that's why I believe he's the point guard, to get that out of the way. I think in the NBA, his role will be point guard, because he could thrive as an off-ball guy if he goes number 3 to 76ers, but I don't think that's necessarily best for his career, because I think he's the best shooter in the class, exception being Kobe Bryant. But let's say the best shooter that I think will go in the first round, that's Trey Johnson. Off the ball, he's one of the best shooters. But let's talk about what he does well as a point guard. He, with a team that had no spacing, creates shots for himself and others at a high clip. He shoots difficult shots because there's no spacing, and he maybe can get a little bit further towards the rim. But if you can make and take tough shots and you have the confidence and it's like, hey, that's a good shot, I mean, those guys are really good. Those guys tend to have a pretty good track record. The ones that I've criticized for shot selection have been Jason Tatum, Paolo Banchero, Brandon Miller, guys like that, because they're that good. I think they can get a better shot. But there's still number 1 overall picks in a couple of those, or number 1, number 2, number 3. You know, all those picks are going. I think Trey Johnson's the 3rd best player in this class. I think he's more polished than Ace Bailey right now. And I think I've got a really bold comparison, and I don't mean it as a 1-to-1. I've said this on draft shows before. The way that Trey Johnson can play, it makes me think the role he might play in the NBA and be an all-star in is one that's similar to that of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is more drive-oriented. If you were to ask anyone coming out of Kentucky, or even at the Clippers, or even early stages with the Thunder, you'd say, okay, he's a shooting guard. You'd say the same thing about Trey Johnson because he's 6'6" and he shoots the ball well. But I think he's such an offensively gifted talent that you're going to put the ball in his hands and he's going to have so many eyeballs on him that he becomes a competent point guard in the sense of the distributing part of the obligation of being a point guard. Shai scores 30 a game, and he's a scorer first, but he's able to distribute the basketball. I think Trey Johnson can score 25 in the NBA, have the focus on him, and distribute the basketball, and that's what I describe as a point guard. So that's my number 2 point guard, and I think he's close with Harper, honestly. I really do. I think Trey Johnson's the 3rd best player in this class, and I like Fears an awful lot. I feel like I was early to the Fears train, but I don't think he's close to Trey Johnson in quite honest transparency.
Yeah, I was glad you went with Johnson, not Edgecombe, because I think I had a pushback on Edgecombe being a point guard at the next level. But Trey Johnson, I think, can be, and I think the SGA comp makes some sense in terms of play style. Again, that's a pretty difficult comp to put on a fresh or 19-year-old. But I get it. I think you're right that he would have been considered a 2 guard. He was considered a 2 guard, and Trey Johnson, I think, kind of got he's obviously really highly regarded, but I think he got missed.
The point guard wasn't Weaver. Like, that's the thing. If the people who watch college basketball watch Texas, like Chendall Weaver did not have the ball in his hands. It was Trey Johnson all the time. So
Johnson was
like
clearly the
that was
point
a bit
guard.
of a misnomer almost.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think there's still a little bit of just like, the shortest guy on the field on the court's the point guard, and the second lane. It's like, no, that's not the case. Like, Weaver played off the ball, Johnson had the ball in his hands. I think that's the role he plays at the next level, depending on team fit. He's a guy that I'm really interested where he ends up going, but I'm with you. I certainly would have had him higher than Fears, and I do like Fears as well.
The Utah Jazz is where he's got to go.
That would be an awesome fit. It'd be fun to see. It feels like they have a lot of like point guards who aren't facilitators, so I'd be interested if that would work. But man, it could be a lot of fun if he was ended up there. But the guy I'm going to go with is a guy I was debating between 2 guys here. I suspect you'll probably take the other one here, although we'll see. But I'm going to go with Illinois point guard Kasparas Jakucionis. Or Jakucionis, excuse me. a guy who's kind of fallen out of favor a little bit in the last month or so. He's kind of dipped from being like a very likely top 10 or top 8 pick to more like he's going to be a lottery pick, but maybe towards the back. I think part of that is just the way that the actual lottery went. I think some of the teams that fit him better are just picking a little bit later. But he's a really talented player. People are concerned about the turnovers. I'm not as concerned. I think that'll get cleaned up in the NBA. He's also very young. The three-point shooting is obviously something that you'd like to see better. He was just under 32% last year, but he's really big for his position. He's got a natural feel for the game. I think the Underwood offense helped him at Illinois, and I think we're going to see him be a guy who maybe it takes a little bit, maybe it takes a year or two. I'll say that I was kind of dead set on my Portland Trailblazers not taking a guard, but I'm like, if he falls to 11 and he's your backup to Scoot and kind of pushing him for playing time, like I do not hate that at all for the Blazers. And I think there's a lot of teams that could get real lucky if he falls a little farther in this draft than people thought, because I think the talent is absolutely there with him.
Yeah, and I think that's the right pick right here. I think he's got a more established track record of success scoring the basketball than does Yegor Demin, who's likely the comparable because he's tall, he's 4, and he's a good passer. But Kasparas Jakucionis at one point during Illinois' season was scoring like 25 and 5.
Yeah,
that level of productivity is just very rare. When Illinois went to Oregon and won by 30, the talk was like, oh, is Illinois a Final Four team, and can Kasparas Jakucionis be a top 5 pick? Kasparas probably falls outside the top 10 right now, and it's not really through fault of his own. Like, yeah, he cooled off a little bit, but he was bearing a enormous load. And so I do think he's the better prospect than Yegor Demin. With that said, I'll take Yegor Demin with the next pick, because Yegor Demin at 6'9", barefoot, like he's 6'8.5" barefoot, and he's the best passer in the draft. I think those are undeniable traits. I do think his shot is getting better. He is still someone I think he plays too upright because he's that tall and he's not very explosive, but he sees over the defense and he creates advantages with his height and his ability to distribute. I have my concerns about Demin being able to handle the intensity and aggression of athletes. Like when he played Houston, he really struggled. Who didn't, though, especially for young guys? So I would take Yegor Demin. I'm a little lower than maybe the consensus on Demin, but I can see the upside appeal very easily because you get the best pass in the draft at 6'9". Like that's simply the pitch. And if his shots gets better and he's able to mature his body, get a little stronger, a little more explosive, and put more rim pressure on, it becomes even better. So there's a world in which a redraft happens, both from the college perspective and just in the NBA, and he's picked too low.
Yeah. I'm lockstep with you on Demin in that way. I think like as a top 10 pick, a top 8 pick, I think that the odds of him kind of returning that value, it might not happen right away. And I think you might see some disappointment, but now that he's sort of fallen into that late lottery kind of conversation, I think at that point, the team fit, if he ends up on a team that fits him, I think he could absolutely return a lot of good value and be a guy that we look back on and like, wow, it's kind of surprising that he was, as far down in that class. And like you said, the pitch is pretty obvious. He's 6'9" and he's the best passer in the class. The other stuff could come to the 3-point shooting is, it didn't look great this season, and there is absolutely reason to be concerned about that. But if that does show up, even if it becomes average, he doesn't have to be lights out, knocked down type of guy. If he becomes just passable in that space, I think he's a player that you end up pretty happy with. And I think that his floor is pretty decently high just because of that size. I think the ceiling is questionable in terms of what that might look like, but the floor is high, and I think you're going to be happy with him in the middle of the first round if that's where he ends up going. Leaf, I'm actually kind of moving a little bit farther down the list here, just in terms of a guy that's probably projected to be picked 10 to 12 spots below where most of these guys have gone at this point. I think this is kind of a bit of a breaking point in the point guard class anyway. At this point, there's one guy that's a little bit higher, but I kind of think he's a 2. I'm curious if you'll end up taking him, but I'm going to go with Walter Clayton Jr., a guy who's probably going to be a late first round pick because of his age, because of his size. He's just 6'2". But my goodness, this man is an incredible basketball player. He just has an elite feel for the game. He's clutch. He's a great shooter, an absolute knockdown 3-point 3-point shooter. He improved as a facilitator last year, had his best passing season, and was pretty comparable on the turnovers. Todd Golden's a guard whisperer, does some great things with those guards. That team was obviously incredibly talented last year, and Clayton was able to maximize that. But he proved himself in the tournament. We see these guys rise because of great tournament runs all the time. To me, a team like Boston or another team in the late first who just wants some veteran guys who can contribute immediately out of this draft class, a guy like Clayton makes a ton of sense to me, and I see him kind of being somebody who could really return some solid value for a team picking in the late first round.
Yeah, Clayton is a guy that I think was probably not seen very highly even before the tournament, even though he was an All-American, because that was basically, like they don't necessarily get tested too often, and he's playing point guard, but really they facilitate through the bigs. They feed it to the top, and Condon throws back cuts, and he knocks down shots. And then the tournament happens, and he was spectacular. He was otherworldly, big time shots, big time distribution. I I have this doubt about these type of picks, because I don't think front offices want to pick the safe player. But then there's been picks taken like Peyton Pritchard at 26 by the Celtics that surprised me a little bit. And it was such an effective pick. And then Marcus Sasser to a lesser degree, same pick actually.
Yeah.
You look at those things, and I think it does align for him to be a first round pick. But I've got a guy I would have ranked just slightly ahead, and I think you were alluding to it, that you may see him as a 2 guard. I'm going with Kam Jones. Kam Jones was a college point guard. He might be a 2 in the NBA, and he probably is, so I agree with you there. But in his role as a 2 guard in the prior seasons next to Tyler Kolek, he could fill the ball up. He's a better shooter than the numbers indicated this past year. He, at one point, was the best player in college basketball, along with Janai Broom and Cooper Flagg to start the season. Like, you can make an argument he was better even than those guys at the start of the season when Marquette, no one had quite figured them out yet, and Kam Jones was superhuman, keeping them in games and winning them games. He gets to his left hand. He's a silky smooth finisher. He's distributed very well, both with the team that had Kolek, and he stepped in and was like, look, I can play point guard. And then this season, the full year of track record, he was a really good passer. I think Kam Jones has been underrated for 3 straight years in the draft cycle. At both those last 2, he went back to Marquette. This year, he's in the draft. I love Kam Jones. I've always loved Kam Jones. So you knew me too well. As soon as you said he may be a 2 guard, I knew exactly what you're thinking. I'd take Kam Jones narrowly ahead of Walter Clayton, just because I think he's got more versatility to bring to the NBA. And I think there were similar level college players. Like, you could make the pitch for regular seasons alone, and winning does matter. Don't get me wrong. I was the biggest Florida Gators fan out here. I would make the argument that Kam Jones was better than Walter Clayton for most of the season.
Yeah, I was a little surprised when I was kind of pulling some of the most updated mock drafts and big boards, how much farther behind Walter Clayton Kam Jones is right now, because for a while they were both kind of considered late first, and they still could be in that late first conversation. But now most of the mocks have Jones closer to like 40, 45, and Clayton is pretty consistently in the late 20s. And obviously the tournament run is a huge part of that and should be factored in to some degree. But yeah, I think Kam Jones is a guy that if somebody gets him at like 45, he's going to return some nice value at that spot. And I do, yes, you're right. I do think he's kind of a tweener positionally, but he's a dude who can play ball, and he's going to fit in somewhere, and he's going to make somebody very happy. I feel pretty confident about that. I am kind of between a couple of guys here, and I'm going to end up going with a guy that I don't love his actual point guard skills, but I like his talent, and I think he is pretty definitively a point guard, and that is Tyrese Proctor, coming out of Duke, 6'5", so he's got the positional size to play the point guard position. He's a guy that we kind of kept waiting for him to have that breakout season at Duke, and last year he kind of finally did, and I think in part because, you know, the ball wasn't so ball dominant last year, because they had Cooper Flagg, who had the ball in his hands a bunch, and obviously an incredibly talented roster around him. But what we did see Tyrese Proctor improve upon last year was his outside shooting. He'd been 35% prior to last year, and last year he was over 40% on a hefty volume too, about 6 attempts per game. He's a very good scorer. He plays his position well on both ends of the floor. But again, the passing, he was over 3.5 assists per game as a sophomore, and then was barely over 2 last year. He didn't turn the ball over much, which I think is good, but I would wonder how much do you think he can facilitate at the next level. But again, if you're talking about him as like a early to mid second round pick, if he can come in and hit open threes and just, you know, not turn the basketball over and play decent defense, you're going to be happy with that. I don't think you need him to be like a 25-minute per game lead guard, constantly, engaging the offense. Like, that's not a role that I think he'd struggle with that role at the NBA level. But if you're asking him to do, more catch and shoot stuff and kind of play almost like a 3-and-D guard role, I think he could do that at the next level pretty capably.
I mean, he's an excellent defender too. Like, this is a guy who was the point of attack on an excellent defense and was the best perimeter defender on that team. So
Right.
I'm a believer in him in that regard. He knocked out a bunch of threes. I do think his point guard traits were taken away a little bit in the sense that Cooper Flagg had the ball. And that was for the better. Don't get me wrong, but I think it kind of hurts Proctor's chances of being a point guard in the next level. But I do think his size and defensive capability put him as a early to mid second round pick.
Mm-hmm. Who do you got next, Leaf? Hit me.
Whew. This is where it gets, you strapped it to the parts of where do we go? I've got one that's a little bit strange. This is off the beaten path. I don't think you're going to guess this. I'm going with Javon Small.
All right.
So Javon Small was at West Virginia, and he scored a lot because they didn't have DeVries. He's got okay size for a point guard, 6'2" and a quarter, but he's got a slightly longer wingspan. He's a good athlete. And what makes me optimistic is he shot 35% from three and 88% from the free throw line. So I think his shooting is not just a flash in the pan. I think he's a good athlete because I thought that when he was playing college basketball, his athleticism set up his jump shot. And I think there's a world he's just a energizer bunny that comes off the bench and give you a little bit of a spark, score the ball, and pressure the ball.
Yeah, I actually like Javon Small. He was on my list. I was not expecting you to take him, but I do think he's a very respectable pick at this spot because of that. He's a kind of a jitterbug microwave type scorer off the bench. Like, it's not hard to see a reality where he contributes to that. And again, if you pick him in the lottery and you're expecting that, then you're going to be disappointed. But if you're taking him in the mid 40s or 50s, you're going to be really happy if he can return that kind of value. Last but not least, you call me Homer if you want. I'm going Ryan Nembhard. And Ryan Nembhard obviously has moved his way up the draft board in part because of the loss of guys like Pettiford and Philon and those, but also he played really well at the G League Elite Camp, got an invitation to the NBA Draft Combine, played really well at the Draft Combine in the scrimmages. He was one of the best shooters in the drills, which I think really helped his draft stock because that was a question mark about Nembhard. In his 2 years at Creighton, he was pretty average three-point shooter, like 33%. His first year at Gonzaga, I think he was about 33%, but then last year he was over 40% from three. And then again, he shot well at the scrimmages. So I think you're seeing a player who can proved he can be at least like a knockdown open three-point shooter. He's the best passer in college basketball last year. He's one of the best passing seasons in the history of college basketball. 344 assists is the fifth most in recorded college basketball history, the second most since 1990. Kendall Marshall from North Carolina being the number one spot there. So yes, his size is a huge limiting factor. He's 6 foot. His athletic testing was, fine for a 6-footer, but he's going to be limited athletically at the next level. It's going to limit his ability to score. It's going to limit his ability to be impactful defensively. But this man can absolutely facilitate. He is somebody who can knock down open shots. I think it's helping him that his brother is having a big moment right now with how he has played for the Indiana Pacers, even though his brother is 5 inches taller than him and a different player in a lot of ways. I do think that the namesake is a little nepotism never hurt anybody, and it's helping Ryan right now. But I think if you're a team picking in the late 40s, 50s, you're going to be pretty happy with Ryan Nembhard, especially if you're a team that just wants somebody who can be your third string point guard, give you some minutes off the bench right away. He's more than capable of delivering that from day one.
Well, I was thinking about taking him when you were picking Proctor. I was thinking to myself, I probably would take Nembhard over Proctor for a pure point guard. And then I realized, it's Andy. He's going to take him eventually. So I set you up with a little alley-oop ball on Nembhard to eat there and there. But I like him a lot. I would have probably taken him in all transparency above Javon Small because I love passing, and Nembhard's the best passer in college basketball. I think Demon has better traits to be a better passer in the NBA, which is why I said he's the best passer in the draft class, and I stand by that. But I love Nembhard. You don't have to sell me too hard on that because ever since Andrew Nembhard was at Florida, I've been like, oh, this guy's great. And then I heard on the broadcast he had a brother. I was like, oh, that guy's going to be great. And honestly, both were right. So
Mm-hmm. Looking at some of the players we didn't talk about, and 10 was kind of the right number here, I think, in terms of college prospects, because I feel like we've kind of hit most of the guys who are likely to actually get selected. The other names that I have on my list, most of them are not showing up pretty consistently on mock drafts. The only one that I think is probably on more mock drafts than off is Mark Sears, of course, who was an elite guard for Alabama for the last 3 years. Great shooter, great floor general, obviously limited by his size. And the other players are kind of all similar to him. They're senior veteran guys: RJ Davis, Chucky Hepburn, Sean Padula, Lamont Butler, who's more of a defensive prospect, but also an older guy with some size limitations. Then you have Kadari Richmond, who is an older prospect as well, but is much bigger at the point guard position, just has some serious limitations as an outside shooter. But Leaf, kind of looking at that group, or if there's any other players that like you think, oh, maybe that's an undrafted free agent who could make some noise and be a guy who sticks around in the league. Are there any of these guys that kind of stand out to you of like, oh yeah, I think you'd be happy if you ended up drafting or signing this guy?
Well, Kadari Richmond is a specimen athletically. Like he's crazy long, he's crazy strong. He plays an old school game, so his offense probably doesn't translate to the NBA. But defensively, you could put him 1 through 3 and he'll be a beast. So that's the guy. If you were to ask me which one of those has the best chance, I'll take him and say, you know what, be a great defender and see what happens. So that would be the one of those guys I'd choose. Sears obviously is going to be the most popular pick, but I watched Sears at the combine when I was there last year. So this year he improved his stock at the combine, but last year it just felt like it was a different league. Everyone was more athletic than him. They were stronger. He couldn't create the same space when he drove into people's bodies. He couldn't shoot the three over them at the same clip. And I think he improved. He did better at the combine this year. But I just have my skepticism about a guy who's that old, learning how to play the point guard as opposed to the guy who's the lead scorer. Whereas a lot of these younger guys, I think that's a benefit. I think in his case, it's a detriment.
Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for making the show Locked On College Basketball your first listen or your first watch of the day. These are fun. We'll hopefully do a few more of these as we got a couple weeks until the June draft rolls around at the end of the month, so we can take a look at some of the other position groups and share some of our thoughts there. But like I said, thanks again for listening, folks. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until Friday, when Isaac and I will be back with you talking about some of the biggest storylines in college hoops. Peace out.